Hi, I'm Cassandra Clare.
And I'm Holly Black.
And we're the authors of The Iron Trial, which is the first book in the new 5-book Magisterium series. Behold our teaser trailer cover. It's not what the cover's going to look like in the end. It's going to be fancier, but we like this. It's very sleek. We wanted to read a little bit from the prologue of The Iron Trial for you and give a little commentary on why we made the choices we did, a little background on the characters and the objects that you're going to be encountering. So Holly is going to read to you in her mellifluous voice.
And poke a little gentle fun at one another. From a distance, the man struggling up the white face of the glacier might have looked like an ant crawling slowly up the side of a dinner plate. So, okay, I'm just going to stop already. This was written by Cassie, and I remember her talking a lot about, what is my middle grade voice? Will I have a middle grade voice? And then she sat down and wrote this sentence, and I thought, this is perfect. I don't know what you need me for. Moving on.
Enough of that.
The shanty town of La Rinconada was a collection of scattered specks far below him, the wind increasing as his elevation did, blowing powdery gusts of snow into his face and freezing the damp tendrils of his black hair.
La Rinconada is actually a place I wound up researching because we wanted this to take place in an incredibly remote location, and I actually got it off of a Google search that turned up a list of 20 most remote villages in the world, and this was the one that appealed to me. It's in South America.
Despite his amber goggles, he winced at the brightness of the reflected sunset. Still, the man was not afraid of falling, although he was using no ropes or belay lines, only crampons and a single ice axe. His name was Alistair Hunt, and he was a mage. He shaped and molded the frozen substance of the glacier under his hands as he climbed. Handholds and footholds appeared as he inched his way upward. By the time he reached the cave, midway up the glacier, he was half frozen and fully exhausted from bending his will to tame the worst of the elements. It sapped his energy to exert his magic so continuously, but he hadn't dared slow down. The cave itself opened like a mouth in the side of the mountain, impossible to see from above or below. He pulled himself over its edge and took a deep, jagged breath, cursing himself for not getting there sooner, for allowing himself to be tricked. In La Rinconada, the people had seen the explosion and whispered under their breaths about what it meant, the fire inside the ice. Fire inside the ice. It had to be a distress signal or an attack. The cave was full of mages too old to fight or too young, the injured and the sick, mothers of very young children who could not be left, like Alistair's own wife and son. They had been hidden away here in one of the most remote places on the earth. Master Rufus had insisted that otherwise they would be vulnerable, hostages to fortune, and Alistair had trusted him. Then, when the enemy of death hadn't shown up on the field to face the mage's champion, the Makar girl upon whom they'd pinned all their hopes, Alistair had realized his mistake. He'd gotten to La Rinconada as fast as he could, flying most of his way on the back of an air elemental. From there, he'd made his way on foot, since the enemy's control of elementals was unpredictable and strong.
So this engendered a big discussion between the two of us because Alistair's timing has to be perfect here, and he's coming from another battle which is taking place in a completely different country, and he has to get to La Rinconada. So we had a lot of long discussions about possible ways that Alistair could have gotten in under 2 hours from North America to South America. So we discussed Alistair's jogging prowess.
Right, and whether or not his own magic was fast enough to get him there in time.
And we decided that, given the way that magic works in this world, if he used his own magic to get there, he'd be too exhausted to do anything else. So we gave him an air elemental, which are creatures that you'll be encountering, again, several times as you go through the books. So,
yeah, and they're faster. I think they're faster.
Yeah, they're fast. It's like riding a dragon.
Like an insubstantial dragon. The higher he'd climbed, the more frightened he'd become. Let them be all right, he thought to himself as he stepped inside the cave. Please let them be all right. There should have been the sound of children wailing. There should have been the low buzz of nervous conversation and the hum of subdued magic. Instead, there was only the howl of wind as it swept over the desolate peak of the mountain. The cave walls were white ice, pocked with red and brown, where blood had spattered and melted in patches. Alistair pulled off his goggles and dropped them on the ground, pushing farther into the passage, drawing on the dregs of his power to steady himself. The walls of the cave gave off an eerie phosphorescent glow. Get used to caves. There's a lot of them. Away from the entrance, it was the only light he had to see by, which probably explained why he stumbled over the first body and nearly fell to his knees. Alistair jerked away with a yell, then winced as he heard his own shout echo back to him. The fallen mage was burned beyond recognition, but she wore the leather wristband with the large hammered piece of copper that marked her as a second-year Magisterium student. And can I just say...
the wristbands are very important. Every student has one, and they say a lot about you, which means that they are the thing that Holly and I fought over the most.
What they looked like the extremely specific detail of what they looked like. I don't think there's a single detail that we disagreed on more vehemently than what these things looked like.
We went through many, many, many mental designs before we came up with one that we were both happy with.
Collaboration.
I still think it would be better if it wound all the way up there, like a snake head at the top. Well, compromise.
Maybe they'll innovate. Maybe that's what they were at the Collegium.
Yeah.
She couldn't have been older than 13. This is a grim moment for us to make a bunch of jokes. You should be used to death by now, he told himself. They'd been at war with the enemy for a decade that sometimes felt like a century. At first it had seemed impossible, one young man, even one of the Macaris, planning to conquer death itself. But as the enemy increased in power and his army of the Chaos-Ridden grew, the threat had become inescapably dire, culminating in this pitiless slaughter of the most helpless, the most innocent. Alistair got to his feet and pushed deeper into the cave, desperately looking for one face above all. He forced his way past the bodies of elderly masters from the Magisterium and Collegium, children of friends and acquaintances, and mages who had been wounded in earlier battles. Among them lay the broken bodies of the Chaos-Ridden, their swirling eyes darkened forever. Though the mages had been unprepared, they must have put up quite a fight to have slain so many of the enemy's forces. Horror churning in his gut, his fingers and toes numb, Alistair staggered through it all until he saw her, Sarah.
Okay, we have a friend named Sarah, and the name was a little bit of a tribute to her, but she's always been upset that the first time her name appears in the book, she's lying dead on a battlefield. And in fact, we wrote the screenplay for the film adaptation of Magisterium, and the first word of the screenplay is Alistair yelling, Sarah! So she wasn't so happy about that either.
I think she's enjoying her tribute in the way the spirit it was given to her. He found her lying in the very back against a cloudy wall of ice. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing. The irises looked murky, and her lashes were clotted with ice. Leaning down, he brushed his fingers over her cooling cheek. He drew in his breath sharply, his sob cutting through the air. Maybe she has a reason not to. But where was their son? Where was Callum? A dagger was clutched in Sarah's right hand. She had excelled at shaping ore summoned deep from the ground. She'd made the dagger herself in their last year at the Magisterium. It had a name, Semiramis. And let me tell you, Cassie loves to name a blade. There is no blade in this world that she does not enjoy to name.
I don't believe that a knife without a name or a weapon without a name is really a weapon. I name all my knives. I name my butter knives. I'm never like, get the butter knife. I'm like, get Ferdinand. But Semiramis, I came up with the name because I was the only one who cared that the knife had a name. And I don't know if I think it comes up in the book, but Semiramis means dove, and so does the name Callum. So the idea is that Sarah sort of named the blade and then named her son to correspond with it.
What's Ferdinand named?
Ferdinand the Bull.
Ferdinand the butter-loving bull. Alistair knew how Sarah had treasured that blade. No, I'm laughing now. If I have to die, I want to die holding my own weapon, she'd always told him, but he hadn't wanted her to die at all. His fingers grazed her cold cheek. A cry made him whip around in this cave full of death and silence. A cry. A child. He turned, searching frantically for the source of the thready wail. It seemed to be coming from closer to the cave entrance. He plunged back the way he had come, stumbling over bodies, some frozen stiff as statues, until suddenly another familiar face stared up at him from the carnage. Declan, Sarah's brother, wounded in the last battle. He appeared to have been choked to death by a particularly cruel use of air magic. His face was blue, his eyes shot with broken blood vessels. One of his arms was outflung, and just underneath it, protected from the icy cave floor by a woven blanket, was Alistair's infant son. As he stared in amazement, the boy opened his mouth and gave another thin, mewling cry.
This is our introduction to our hero, Cal. You meet him complaining, and he continues complaining throughout the entire book.
Through the entire series. As if in a trance, shaking with relief, Alistair bent and lifted his child. The boy looked up at him with wide gray eyes and opened his mouth to scream again. As the blanket fell aside, Alistair could see why. The baby's left leg hung at a terrible angle, like a snapped tree branch. Alistair tried to call up earth magic to heal the boy, but it had only enough power left to take away some of the pain. Heart racing, he rewrapped his son tightly in the blanket and wound his way back through the cave to where Sarah lay. Holding the baby as if she could see him, he knelt down beside her body. "Sarah," he whispered, tears thick in his throat, "I'll tell him how you died protecting him. I will raise him to remember how brave you were." Her eyes stared at him, blank and pale. He held the child more closely to his side and reached to take some ramus from her hand. As he did, he saw the ice near the blade was strangely marked, as if she had clawed at it while dying. But the marks were too deliberate for that. As he bent closer, he realized they were words his wife had carved into the ice cave with the last of her dying strength. As he read them, he felt them like 3 hard blows to the stomach. Kill the child. That part sounds so funny.
I got no funny thing to say about that. Anyway, we hope you enjoyed the prologue. We loved writing it. It's a lot of fun, and I love that it ends with a bang.